Hello, dear learners. I welcome you all to this MOOC on Heritage Tourism once again. Today, we are going to discuss authenticity, interpretation, and heritage values of Unit 1 of the Module 3. Authenticity and values are central to heritage tourism. Tourists seek authentic experience of history and culture, yet heritage sites often involve staged or mediated presentations. Authenticity in cultural heritage refers to the quality by which a heritage asset, tangible or intangible, is recognized as genuine and true to its origin. The Venice Charter 1964 enshrined this idea in its preamble. It is our duty to hand them on in the full richness of their authenticity. UNESCO's Nara document 1994 similarly states that authenticity remains the essential qualifying factor concerning values. These charters emphasize that preserving original materials, designs, and context is crucial. However, authenticity is now understood more broadly, not only original fabric or form, but also intangible qualities like function, use, spirit, and community value. Indeed, UNESCO's operational guidelines integrate the Nara principles, asserting that judgments of authenticity must consider design and form, materials and substance, use and functions, tradition and techniques, location and settings, spirit and feelings. Heritage studies scholars highlight that authenticity is complex and culturally relative. David Lowenthal famously argued that heritage relies on revealed faith rather than rational proof. People celebrate heritage because they feel it is right, not because of objective truth. In this view, authenticity is a negotiated concept rather than an absolute. Lowenthal observes that in the past, things were deemed authentic by authority or belief, whereas today in the modern West, we seek material truth as a sign of authenticity. Similarly, Lorraine Smith's critique of the authorized heritage discourse point out that official heritage practice often privileges elite Western-centric values of authenticity, sidelining local and intangible meanings. Tourism scholars add that tourists' experience of authenticity may be staged or constructed. Dean McCannell coined staged authenticity to describe how cultural displays are arranged for visitors, and Eric Cohen, 1988, noted that authenticity is negotiated between host and tourist. Wang Ning further expanded this by identifying three forms of authenticity in tourism: objective, which means original material truth; constructive, social mediate meaning; and existential and inner sense of genuineness. We warned that authenticity is not a matter of black or white, but rather a much wider spectrum. Something experts see as staged may still feel authentic to participants. In sum, while early charters treated authenticity as a fixed quality of monuments and sites, contemporary thought recognizes authenticity as contextual and multifaceted. Factors like cultural context, community beliefs, continuity of a tradition, and visitor perception all play a crucial role. Factors like cultural context, community beliefs, continuity of tradition, and visitor perception all play a role. UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention 2024 reflect this by defining intangible heritage in terms of community recognition and transmission. Practices that communities recognize as a part of their cultural heritage and that are transmitted from generation to generation, provide them a sense of identity and continuity. Thus, intangible authenticity lies in living cultural continuity and meaning, not just in conserving ritual exactly as in the past. International charters and guidelines. International conservation charters provide formal criteria for authenticity. The 1964 Venice Charters asserts that monuments, as living witnesses of their age-old traditions, must be preserved in the full richness of their authenticity. This echoes Article 9 of the Charter, which mandates that restoration must respect original materials and authenticity documents. However, the Venice Charter's notion was largely Eurocentric and material focused. By the 1990s, global conservationists recognized the need for a more inclusive approach. The 1994 NORA document on authenticity, drafted at a UNESCO International Council of Monuments and Sites, which is called ICOMOS, conference in Nara, Japan, expanded the concept. It emphasized that authenticity depends on culture, context, and variety of information sources. Nora explicitly stated that authenticity judgments must consider design, material use, tradition, location, spirit, and feeling. Importantly, it acknowledged that authenticity criteria cannot be fixed across all cultures. What matters is what a community deems credible. Subsequent UNESCO guidelines and declaration have integrated the NORA principles. The operational guidelines for the World Heritage Convention now include authenticity and integrity as a co-qualifying condition for cultural inscription. For example, to inscribe a cultural property, the World Heritage Committee examined whether authenticity in material, form, function, etc., and integrity, completeness are upheld. In practice, UNESCO documents for heritage sites explicitly discuss authenticity. For instance, the recent inscription of the Ahom burial mounds, Moidams, at Saraido, Assam describe authenticity as the intactness of the Moidam and their landscape setting, affirmed by historical chronicles, which is called Buranji, that detail their construction and rituals. Similarly, the UNESCO tentative nomination for the Living Road Bridge landscapes notes that authenticity derives from sustaining an ancient evolving system. The Khasi communities have maintained the natural bridge building process and related practices intact for centuries. Thus, international policy now frames authenticity not only as a preserving original fabric, but also ensuring the continuity of cultural practice and context. The Venice Charter's maxims the preserved richness of authenticity stand but is tempered by Nora's recognition that each culture may privilege different source of authenticity. Example, ritual use over original materials in some societies. Academics perspectives. Heritage scholars have critically examined authenticity as a social construct. Laura Jane Smith challenged the notion of authenticity as self-evident, arguing that heritage is manufactured through discourse and power. She introduced the term authorized heritage discourse to describe the top-down, expert-led assumption about what heritage is, often privileging monumental and westernized view. Under authorized heritage discourse, material preservation is often seen as the authentic form of heritage, overshadowing intangible dimensions. Smith's critique implies that different stakeholders like government, local communities, tourists may contest what is authentic. David Lowenthal also emphasized the subjectivity of authenticity. He noted that different people may feel very different things as authentic. Something one visitor finds genuine, another may not. Lowenthal famously said, heritage is about faith, not proof. We elected exalt or our legacy by feeling that it must be right. He argued that modern Western emphasis on material integrity is not a universal criteria. In some cultures, authenticity is tied to the spirit of function, not surviving original fabric. In heritage discourse, Lowenthal viewed authenticity and heritage itself as a negotiated concept, redefined by each generation. Tourism scholarship further complicated authenticity. Dean McCannell observed that tourists seek authentic experiences but often encounter staged or commodified version of culture. Eric Cohen described authenticity as negotiable and context dependent. Building on this, Wang Ning argued for a broader experiential view. Authenticity in tourism involves not only the physical object's truth but also the visitor's lived experience. Wang identified objective authenticity, the factual origin, constructive authenticity, social constructed meaning by the community or tourist, and existential authenticity, a personal emotional sense of genuineness. As Wang puts it, even a replica can be felt as authentic by someone from an emic perspective. This insight challenges rigid definitions. A community may accept a recreated tradition as authentic if it feels right to them, even if it diverges from historical form. In some, scholars emphasize that authenticity is multidimensional. It involves objective facts, original material, historical continuity, as well as social meaning and personal perception. Heritage and authenticity are shaped by power and context. Whose authenticity counts? The authorized heritage discourse critic remind us official bodies may impose on standard, but grassroots communities often have their own measures of what is authentic to their identity. Authenticity in India and Northeast heritage. India's rich cultural tapestry, both tangible and intangible, adds layer to the authenticity debate. Unlike some Western contexts, in Indian heritage conservation often operates with living traditions. For instance, temple tradition in India may include periodic rebuilding or renovations, as in Japanese Shinto shrine, which Western charters might label loss of authenticity, yet local view it as preservation of ritual and skills. In Assam and Northeast India, preserving authenticity means honoring tribal knowledge, ongoing rituals, and communal landscapes. Northeast India, in particular, has outstanding tangible heritage, monument of Ahom, Khasi, and other kingdoms, and vibrant living cultures. Maintaining authenticity here involves both conserving built heritage and respecting cultural continuity. For example, the discovery and conservation of Ahom monuments at Shivsagar, the former Ahom capital, engaged ASI archaeologists and community historians like to ensure restoration use tradition, techniques, and motifs. Similarly, efforts to document and support tribal craft, weaving, mask-making, weaving motifs, etc., aim to keep those traditions true to their original method while allowing evolution. Several institutions guide this process. The Indian National Trust of Art and Cultural Heritage promulgates principles emphasizing authenticity and integrity, encouraging minimal intervention and the use of original materials or traditional skills whenever possible. National policies like the Ancient Monument Act legally protected sites implicitly valuing their authenticity. However, challenges arise when heritage is unprotected or when modern needs, tourism facilities, infrastructures press against conservation. Conservationists must balance preserving original materials with enabling sustainable use. In India's heritage context, intangible authenticity is also key. The 2023 UNESCO Intangible Heritage Convention, which India has ratified, notes that intangible heritage is a constantly recreated in response to the community's environment and history. This means that, for example, folk music and dance form can evolve and still be authentic as long as they remain meaningful in the community's identity. Indeed, many Assamese and tribal festivals have adopted new elements, example modern instrument in traditional music. Some purists may worry this dilutes authenticity, but others see it as living tradition. Thus, in India and Northeast India, authenticity is often framed not as preserving an unchanging relic, but as continuity of cultural meaning. This aligns with Lowenthal's view and with Asia's perspective in Nara. A rebuilt structure or reinterpreted ritual can maintain authenticity if the spirit and communal significance persist. Heritage interpretation. Heritage interpretation is the communication of those values. UNESCO defines it as a meaning-making process through communication, participation, and experience. In other words, interpretation is not just factual exposition but the creation link of site stories, symbols, and significance to the visitor's own context. Freeman Tilden, a pioneer of heritage interpretation, stressed that interpretation should reveal deeper meaning and provoke reflection rather than simple relay facts. UNESCO further stressed that interpretation must make heritage accessible and inclusive, giving voice to the values of the site and even to the broader goals of education and citizenship. Interpretation thus connects tangible heritage monument site with the intangible values, memories, beliefs, tradition that sustain a community sense of identity and history. Laura Jane Smith argues that there is no such thing as a heritage in an essential sense. Rather, heritage is discursively constructed by people as a part of cultural memory and identity. This means interpretation is also a cultural process. It shapes and reshapes how communities and visitors understand the past. Theoretical background of heritage interpretation and value. Heritage interpretation draw on theory from education, museum studies, and anthropology. It is understood as a pedagogical tool that reveals the values embedded in site. UNESCO recent guides emphasize a values-driven approach, arguing that interpretation should link to sustainable development and global citizenship goals. For example, an interpretation plan might highlight not only the artistic merits of a temple but also its lessons for tolerance and environmental stewardship. Effective interpretation often uses storytelling or thematic experiences to engage multiple senses and learning styles. Guided tours, exhibits, digital media, dramatic reenactments, etc. Key principles include relating messages to visitors' own experiences and emotions and connecting specific facts to larger themes and ideas stressed by Tilden's principles of interpretation. As Tilden wrote, information, however interesting, is not interpretation. Interpretation is revelation based upon informations. Example, it reveals the why behind a fact. In practice, this means that an interpreter at a monument will contextualize the site's history, social significance, and relevant legend or ritual. helping visitor appreciate the site meaning beyond its physical form. Heritage value can be categorized in multiple ways. One common framework issued in UNESCO and conservation literature identifies categories such as aesthetic or artistic value, historical or associative value, social or cultural value, scientific or technical value, and spiritual or symbolic value. For example, aesthetic value, the site's beauty or creative craftsmanship. Example, Ajanta's cave paintings and carvings are lauded as masterpiece of Buddhist art. Historical value, connection to important events or people. Example, a fort associated with a dynasty, the birthplace of a movement. A social or cultural value, role in community identity and living traditions. Example, temples where local festivals occur or heritage landscapes that embody collective memory. Scientific or technical value, information provided by site. Example, archaeological knowledge, engineering innovations like the Kailash temple at Ellora. Spiritual or symbolic value, sacred meanings or intangible beliefs linked to the site. Example, pilgrimage significance, cosmological symbolism of temple architecture. Interpretation and heritage management must recognize all these dimensions. For instance, religious sites often have living heritage aspects, rituals, myths, festivals. Researchers note that in India, religious, historical, and socio-cultural values are critical to the heritage identity of religious sites, and that heritage values are dynamic, continually shaped by tradition and community practice. One study of Indian temple precincts emphasized that a site significance arises not merely from the physical remains but out of the range of values attached to it, be it tangible or intangible. In other words, a temple is important not just as an artifact, but for what it means: devotion, communal identity, artisanship. Interpretation should therefore present not only the chronology or architecture, but also the living stories, beliefs, and functions that give a site its meaning. UNESCO's World Heritage Framework formalizes these values as outstanding universal value for selected sites. Criteria 1 to 6 for World Heritage cover many values from masterpiece of human creative genius to testimony to cultural tradition to associate with living tradition. For example, Ajanta caves meet criteria for artistic achievement and influence on art, while Khajuraho temples were inscribed under artistry and as a witnesses of the Chandela culture. In all cases, understanding why a site has outstanding universal value, what values it represents, is a key interpretive goal. Interpreter also often incorporate local scholarly and oral histories to deepen the narrative. Example, citing ancient texts, local legend, or archaeological findings. Indian case studies on heritage site and interpretation. India's rich heritage provides many case studies of how interpretation conveys cultural values. For example, Ajanta caves of Maharashtra. Ajanta's 30 rock-cut Buddhist caves are celebrated by UNESCO as one of the greatest achievements in ancient Buddhist rock-cut architectures, with murals and sculpture that present in an important and rare specimen of art, architecture, painting, and socio-cultural, religious, and political history. Interpretation at Ajanta usually emphasizes the spiritual themes, artistic techniques, and historical context of the Satavahana and Bhaktaka dynasty. Guides highlight the devotional function of the caves. Some are satyagrihas or prayer halls, and point out detail of the morals, example, portrayal of court life, flora, and Buddhist iconography. The authenticity of Ajanta is maintained through preservation of original element. UNESCO notes that Ajanta's authenticity is evident in its unaltered rock-carved form and centuries-old paintings. Thus, visitors experience the caves much as ancient pilgrims did, reinforce the site's values of religious devotion and artistic excellence. Ellora Caves of Maharashtra. Ellora's 34 monuments include sequential Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain shrines side by side. UNESCO highlight Ellora as an invaluable example that showcases a spirit of coexistence and religious tolerance through the outstanding architectural activities of the three faiths. Interpretation at Ellora often stresses that pluralism. Visitors are guided through the Buddhist viharas, the rock-cut Kailash temple dedicated to Shiva, and the Jaina caves in sequence, illustrating how generations of devotion are layered in one landscape. The engineering marvel of the Kailasa temple, a monolithic excavation, is explained as epic ingenuity, and visitors are visited to reflect on its scale and precision. UNESCO explicitly notes Ellora's authenticity in terms of its original rock forms, design, and settings. So, interpretive materials encourage appreciating the site as it was, with intact sculpture and paint fragments that vividly convey Ellora's medieval spirit. By narrating Ellora's story of cultural tolerance and artistry, interpretation connects historical values to present-day pluralism. Khajuraho group of monuments of Madhya Pradesh. The famed Khajuraho temples are known for their intricate Nagara-style architecture and profuse sculptures. UNESCO described them as the culmination of northern Indian temple art, showing both original architectural form and a harmonious integration of sculpture with their architecture. The sculpture program depicting gods, mythic scenes, and many secular images, musician, dancer, and couples is a key interpretive focus. Guides explain how the carving represent the Chandela ruler's worldview, divine stories along the pilgrim's path, alongside motif celebration, human life, and love. This duality, sacred and profane imagery, is framed as a reflecting Hindu cosmology and social life. UNESCO further notes that Khajuraho's authenticity is preserved in its original sandstone form and ornamentation. Thus, interpretation at Khajuraho emphasizes craftsmanship, example, the exceptional Kendriya Mahadev temple, and meaning in iconography. The famous erotic sculptures are often discussed in terms of tantric symbolism or life force. Other major sites. A complete survey would mention many more. The Taj Mahal is often interpreted as a symbol of Mughal art and the emperor devotion. UNESCO cites it as a masterpiece of universal value for its harmonious architecture. Mahabalipuram temple are explained as a Pallava innovations in Dravidian sculpture. The Kanrak Sun temple is interpreted in terms of its cosmic symbolism. Chariot of the Sun God, UNESCO inscription criteria 1 and 4. Even urban complexes like Fatehpur Sikri or Hampi are introduced by their historical context. In every case, interpreters integrated multiple values. For instance, noting both the aesthetic beauty and socio-historical narrative, religious tradition, trade. Informative panels or guides also often refer to UNESCO's outstanding universal value criteria, implicitly helping visitors grasp why each site was inscribed. Importantly, interpretation at Indian heritage sites is increasingly adaptive. In recent years, many sites have interactive museum or audio tours that contextualize history for diverse audience. For example, at Ajanta, there is a visitor center with multimedia displays about cave construction and painting techniques, while at Khajuraho, some guides role play temple priests to explain rituals. This method exemplify interpretation's goal to make heritage more meaningful as an educational experience and linked to today's issues. In Northeast India has a distinctive heritage landscape often underrepresented in mainstream narratives. Soraido Moidam in Assam, recently inscribed as India's first UNESCO World Heritage Site from the Northeast, illustrates this well. The Moidams, which is called burial mounds of the Ahom kings, are an identity of Thai Ahom dynasty, rich culture and heritage. UNESCO recognizes Soraido not only for its monumental archaeology but also for living Ahom tradition associated with it. Dipjyoti Barua and Dr. Pradeep Kumar emphasized that Soraido's value lies in connecting tangible tombs with intangible rituals. The site plays a significant role in preserving and promoting the Thai Ahom community's intangible cultural heritage. For interpreters, this means conveying the Ahom worldview and customs. The Press Information Bureau notes that the Thai Ahom believed their kings to be divine. Over 600 years, they built elaborate moidams and conducted grand funerary ceremonies. In practical terms, interpretation at Soraido involved explaining Ahom history and explain ritual like Medam Mefi, which is ancestor worship, and Tarpan, offering libations performed by local communities. Importantly, UNESCO affirms that Soraido's authenticity is preserved. Its moidams are largely intact in their rural landscape, and historical chronicles like the Buronzis provide detailed context of Ahom life and beliefs. These chronicles are often referenced by guides to relate accurate historical detail. Moreover, local involvement is high. Communities still regard the Moidam as sacred and participate in their upkeep. Thus, interpretation at Soraido is not just a top-down presentation but a living conversation. It incorporates Ahom narratives and language and making heritage education relevant to both local youth and broader audience. Other Northeast heritage sites offer similar interpretive opportunities. For example, Majuli Island hosts Vaishnavite satras that have intangible folk music tradition. Interpretation there combines temple art and dance with agrarian calendars values. Haflong, Imphal, and Kohima have monuments and museums where interpretation link material ruins to community memories. Across Northeast, many tribal heritage, example Naga Hornbill Festival, Khasi Living Road bridges, Buddhist Sungtong Sak, tantric wood carving are increasingly being interpreted in cultural tourism circuits. The key challenges noted by experts is balancing promotion with authenticity and community benefits, avoiding commercialization that might dilute meaning. In Soraido's case, scholars advise creating culturally sensitive interpretation plan that engages Thai Ahom youth as a stewards, ensuring that tourism educates visitor and empowers the custodial community. In summary, authenticity and interpretation of cultural heritage is fundamentally about communication values. A comprehensive approach connects authenticity heritage elements to their significance, historical, aesthetic, social, and spiritual. UNESCO emphasized that values driven interpretation can make heritage inclusive and educational, fostering not only appreciation but also shared commitment to conservation. For India and northeastern side, the means weaving together diverse narratives, imperial histories, indigenous traditions, religious syncretism, and present day community identities by citing chronicles, oral histories, and scholarly research alongside material evidence. Interpreters ensure depth and authenticity. Different references remind us that heritage meaning is contested and evolving. Ultimately, heritage education through interpretation empowers uh, learners and the public to critically engage with the past. As one UNESCO researcher notes, interpretation turns World Heritage into a platform for sustainable development and global citizenship. In the Indian context, this fulfills a broader vision, preserving the cultural heritage of all while respecting each community's voice. Thank you so much.